Hello, everybody. I wanted to take a minute to talk about something that has been on my mind for a little bit, and it is the effects of loneliness on our physiology. So, as some of you know, and a lot of you don't, I work in assisted living buildings, directly in the buildings, facilitating and coordinating care, specifically physical therapy for the residents in the building. We do work with independent living as well and memory care. So these are all retirement communities, and I have worked in 6 buildings in the last 4 years around the Phoenix metropolitan area. And what I've been seeing over this past year has been really distressing to me. So I wanted to discuss in a short video just so many aspects of something that is so detrimental to our physiological well-being, and that is loneliness and isolation. According to the CDC, there's no perfect metric to be able to say every single aspect that is measured is 100% correlated and causal to isolation and loneliness. But there are a lot of metrics that are capable of being measured to give us really good ideas on just how important this aspect is to our well-being. So according to the CDC, it says social isolation specifically increased a person's risk of premature death from all causes, a risk that may rival even smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. It also says that social isolation is associated with about a 50% increased risk in dementia. Just speaking on these 2 things alone, there are many more that I'll get to, but just speaking on these 2 things alone, it is extraordinarily prevalent in the communities in which I work. This past year, a lot of people, when I have told them what I am experiencing and what I'm seeing in these buildings, tell me that they can't believe that to be true. They don't believe that that's actually happening. And here's what I mean. When anybody gets a sniffle, if anybody gets a rapid antigen test, which is not a predictor of COVID, by the way, but when they get a rapid antigen test that flips positive, and false positives are common, the entire building will go into a state of immense lockdown. And what I mean by that is the residents in the building, most of whom are 65 and older, okay? This is the population that I specifically work with, are locked into their apartment, and they're not even allowed to walk the hallways. I'm gonna say that again. They're not even allowed to walk the hallways. Not with a mask on, nothing. They are yelled at to get back in their room if they try to leave their apartment. Some of their apartments are studio size, so we're talking about 20 by 10, 20 by 15, which is a bedroom for some of you all watching, okay? And I want you to imagine that for a year almost now, you have been forced to stay in your bedroom and not leave. Not to get out in the hallways of your house, not to get out into your backyard to get sunlight or fresh air, not to see anybody, obviously. We've been socially isolating, and these people are not allowed to even see their families, okay? And we say this is all for the greater good, and we say this is all for their health, and clearly we know that there is a virus that has a transmissibility and has the ability to wreak havoc on somebody's health, and I'm not dismissing the fact that we have a virus. I'm not dismissing the fact that it is possible for it to spread. I am not dismissing the fact that it can be detrimental to people's health, okay? Not dismissing any of that. What I am trying to do is create a picture for you so that you get a better understanding, because the majority of you don't experience the assisted living experience firsthand the way that those of us who work in them do. Most of you don't understand that when you can't go see your family in the assisted living building, what it is like for your family member in that building. That they are being screamed at if they even try to leave their room. This is real. This is actually happening. Okay? And it's not just one building. Like I said, I've been to many, and I have actually stepped foot in and seen 4 buildings within the last year alone that it is all the same. Now, there are some buildings whose CEOs have decided to adopt different measures. So not all buildings are exactly the same, and I understand that. But it's happening more and more the more healthcare providers I talk to. It's not a huge community. I mean, we're talking about healthcare professionals that work in these settings. We pretty much kind of wind up getting to know each other. Any of you who've worked in these settings with home health, skilled nursing facilities, ALFs, assisted living facilities, you know that the world kind of shrinks and becomes a little bit smaller. You all start to know each other. You've all worked in each other's different buildings or for each other's different companies, okay? So when we talk about something like dementia increasing by 50% due to social isolation and loneliness, and this is what we've imposed upon the most vulnerable population for dementia for the last year almost, what I have seen is rapid degeneration in people's health. I have seen horrific detriments to what we're doing, not just their mental health, okay? We're not just talking about the dementia that I see dramatically escalate, but we're talking about physiological health too. They're not allowed to get up and walk. They used to get up and walk the hallways around the building. Sometimes they'd make laps. There's a building I worked in where 7 laps was a mile. And there I knew which residents I was gonna see every day passing my office at least 7 times. They wanted to get at least that mile in. With their walker, with their cane, it didn't matter. It was important to them to keep walking and keep moving because they knew how crucial that was for their mobility and their overall physiological well-being, okay? There are so many aspects of our physiological health that are reliant on movement, okay? The lymphatic system is probably what I would consider the biggest one. Obviously, the cardiovascular system is extraordinarily impacted by physical exercise, so I'm not diminishing that. But the lymphatic system is where we, pull all of our toxins to try and get them flushed out of our system. And in this population in specific, when we talk about people that have edema in their legs and have already had lymph removal because of breast cancer or whatever, it is extremely important that their lymphatic system stay active. And the only mechanism, the only pump to get the lymphatic system moving, pumping, flushing is muscular movement, activity, exercise, okay? So we're isolating a population that needs movement more than anyone else, pretty much. And we are socially isolating them and making it so that their brain processes don't have to work and they're sitting in front of a television 24/7, not using their thinking skills, not even remembering what day of the week it is because they're literally sitting in a box. Remember, visualize, you're sitting in your bedroom for a year. Nowhere to go, no one to see. Maybe you get a phone call once in a while. You get your meals delivered to your door like you're a prison inmate in an isolation cell. That is what we've considered helpful in this pandemic. Do I understand we have to take precautions to make sure that we try to mitigate transmission of disease as much as possible? Absolutely, okay? I'm not diminishing that. You want to enforce masks? Enforce masks. You want to enforce hand sanitizer every 2 feet down a hallway? Enforce hand sanitizer every 2 feet down a hallway. Increase the amount of cleaning that comes into your building, etc., etc. There are things that we can do that don't include shoving somebody away who already feels like they are isolated from society, okay? The elderly population is already treated like a burden by the majority of society. They're already dismissed and thrown away by the majority of society, even their own families at times, because they're not useful anymore, right? Or they're too much of a burden. Their health issues are too much of a problem. They already felt like this before the pandemic. And now it's just so dramatically worse. I read something the other day, and I'll try to find it so I can post it in the comments below, but it said that before the pandemic, more than 3 out of 5 people said that they felt lonely. And a quarter of all people said that they felt misunderstood, left out, alone. And a fifth of all people, I think it was like 20% of all people, felt like they never really even got the opportunity to develop deep connections with people anymore. Or at least they struggled to, they wanted to, but it was a struggle because it doesn't seem like that's a priority for so many people anymore. And then I started to see that. I was like, wow, like that was before the pandemic and social isolating. That was before the pandemic and creating fear between people and division. That was before a politically supercharged last year that just created so much divisiveness between people. I can't even imagine what those numbers are now. So with loneliness and isolation being such a physiological problem, not just a psychological one, it doesn't seem like we're doing ourselves any good by adopting protocols, by adopting beliefs that keep us more disconnected from each other than ever. Human connection is so deeply rooted into everything and important in our species that it just seems like poor sense to do anything to divide us more than we need to be. Here for the CDC as well, poor social relationships characterized by isolation or loneliness was associated with a 30% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke. And I have seen that. Loneliness was associated with higher risks of depression, anxiety, and suicide. I have seen that in these elderly populated communities where I'm working. The depression rate is overwhelming. The amount of psych visits that I've had to facilitate trying to coordinate is astronomical. It's really unfair. Loneliness is among heart failure patients. It was associated with nearly 4 times the increased risk of death of heart failure patients. 68% increased risk of hospitalization, 57% increased risk of emergency department visits. Almost every day that I go to work, I'm either greeted by or I am exiting the building and leaving and seeing the EMS department at our building. And I'm going to tell you, it's not all from COVID. So the numbers are significant, and we're not doing ourselves any favors, especially in an atmosphere where we're cultivating more and more keyboard warriors. I've seen and I've talked to so many people that said that they haven't talked to their family in a year because they had differing political beliefs last year, or that they've been written off by friends who knew them since they were a child, and they were just dismissed and canceled out and erased from everything in their life. And that connection that they had for all these decades was just worth nothing enough to just throw away. That's what we've come to. That's who we are now as a species. I think we can do better. I found myself falling into the trap. I think we've all fallen into that trap to some degree, especially over the last year, of just, it's beautiful to be able to exist as an independent person who is capable of functioning on their own and, quote, doesn't need people. But we do need people, and we do need connection. And these statistics alone that just, are even by the CDC's recognition, so critical in our physiological well-being. There's an entire field of science called psychoneuroimmunology. It's been around for a while. You can look it up. It is abbreviated PNI. It studies the direct correlation between our psyche, our psychological thoughts, and our nervous system, our neurology. We have multiple systems of neurology in the body. Some are for fight or flight, some are for rest and digest, some are, between the gut and the brain. So we have these various systems related to our neurological health. And our neurology is directly linked to our immunity. Psychoneuroimmunology. We literally have the ability to think ourselves sick or think ourselves well. And we've known this for a long time. This field of study is fascinating if you ever decide that you want to dive into any of the literature, or even just, I'm sure, the TED Talks that are out there or other videos that are easy to come upon. But the fact that our psyche has so much power over our nervous system, and that has so much power over our immune system, we're in a moment in history where increasing our immune system's ability to do its job is at the utmost importance right now for everybody, every population. It behooves us to understand which things can help us increase our immune system so that we can better fight this virus and viruses that are predicted to come in the future. I was talking with a friend the other day, and he asked, well, what else can we do other than try and make vaccines and whatever. I'm like, well, vaccines are great, but they're reactive. Okay, every time we ever create a vaccine, it's always behind where the next level of mutation is in a virus. So we're always trying to play catch up, and it's always a game of reactivity. And my struggle is that I'm wondering why we're not taking more accountability and placing more importance on the proactivity that we can be doing from now all the way into the future to increasing our immune system's ability to do its job. And part of that has to do with our mental well-being. They are directly linked. Mental well-being and physiological well-being are directly linked. There is no gap between them. And if we already know what social isolating does, and we already know what loneliness does, and we already know the amount of people who complained of loneliness and being left out and feeling misunderstood and, not forming deep connections with people, if we already knew what those numbers were before the pandemic, and we know this pandemic has increased them dramatically, then my challenge to everybody, my call to arms right now is for everybody to start 2021 with the resolution of, even if it's one person in your life, build strong connections. Build them. Nurture them. Advocate for them. Advocate for socializing. In safe ways. We can socialize safely. There's a way to do that. If we're still worried about transmissibility of the pandemic virus that's happening right now, great, then be able to be social in a safe way. And that's not just through a screen. That's not just through a screen. There are so many studies, and you can find them, that it is not at all the same to have the interaction through a screen as it is in person. Now, can we maintain a distance between each other if we need to? Absolutely. But we should still at least be able to have that engagement. And what I'm seeing is in the communities where I work, not only are these beautiful members of society not even allowed to walk down their own freaking hallway, they're not allowed to get out into the courtyard to get fresh air and sunlight. They're not allowed to, engage in any activities they used to that kept their mind and their body going and healthy and stimulated. They're not allowed to even, they're not even allowed to socialize with their friends that they've been in the building with for X amount of years. It's doing so much more harm than it seems like it's doing good. And there's no way to stop the transmissibility of a virus altogether. There is absolutely no way to control that 100%. So why are we damaging the rest of people's physiology? Why are we damaging the rest of their psyche when we know we're not capable of preventing everything 100%? There should be a better way of striking a balance, a much better way. And we need to find it, and we need to advocate for it. It's something that we should be speaking out about. And this, I'm not even going to go into what's happening with our children, okay? Like, that's a whole nother topic that probably parents would have a lot more insightful things to offer than I would, because I see it from the outside and I'm not even living it because I'm not a parent directly. I mean, I have children in my life through other people, but I'm not a parent. I don't see what it's doing to a child on a daily basis. I don't know how it's affecting them. So that's a whole nother topic. But challenge yourself this year to embrace your connections, try to make them stronger. Any connections that you know that the whole downward spiral of negativity that was happening last year, if you found yourself falling into that trap like I did, and like I know a lot of people have said to me that they have, and you know that you lost connections with certain people that are important to you, that you know had value in your life and contributed to your life in a good way, or that rebuild those connections. Do everything that you can to keep them strong. Advocate for the connections of those family members of yours that you know are in these buildings that are so isolated. Write them letters. Call them more often. Do what you can. It's important. It's important. Reach out. Don't just post on social media, hey, you can call me if you're feeling like it. Don't be passive like that. That's great, but that's sort of like a vaccine in my mind. That's reactive. It's a great thing to have. It's something that is great to a certain point, but there also needs to be a proactivity. There needs to be the person who steps in and actually calls their friend and says, hey, how are you doing? Try not to just sit back and be reactive and expect that if somebody is lonely, if somebody is experiencing higher levels of depression, don't expect that they're going to reach out. That's an unrealistic expectation. They are already going down a rabbit hole of emotion that they're probably not used to. And it's really, really hard for people to reach out and ask for help. It just is. Call it pride, call it ego, whatever it is. It's so much harder for people to ask for help than it is for them to pick up the phone when somebody calls them. So if you really want to help people, if you really want to be that advocate, if you really want to be the person that helps to maintain social connections, be the person who calls. Reach out. If you know that there's somebody you haven't heard from in a while, reach out. Say, how are you doing? Hey, do you want to get together and maintain distance and have masks? And you can do it in any way you want, but keep those bonds alive because they're so critically important for our mental well-being, which is directly tied to our physiological well-being. And we all need more of that now more than ever. And going forward, I'm hoping that if we can use this year to come together and build connections, rebuild lost connections, strengthen the ones that we have, that maybe we can turn those pre-pandemic numbers of more than 3 out of 5 people feeling lonely and a quarter of the population feeling alone, left out, and misunderstood, and a fifth of the population feeling like they have no deep connections with anybody. I'm hoping that those pre-pandemic numbers can even get better. We need the current numbers to get better because I'm sure they're worse after this whole last year. But man, if we can make even the pre-pandemic numbers better, that's something worth shooting for. Something well worth shooting for. And that's just where I'm at right now. So hopefully you take whatever you do from this and you find something valuable in it. And I wish for you good social connections. I wish for you less loneliness, less isolation, less disconnection, and more love, more appreciation, more connection going forward into this year. All right. Happiness and health to you. Bye, you guys.